Now I'm crashing out. Cause now I'm gonna crash out and I don't give a I want you to die, but I want you to die slow.
What you're looking at is not just a celebrity meltdown. It's the moment when the mythology of fame cracks open and the human cost spills out for everyone to see. One of the most powerful women in music standing in front of the world, emotionally shattered. And here's the uncomfortable truth. She's not even the most extreme story in this lineup. Because behind the platinum records and billion-stream playlists lies a pattern the industry rarely talks about. Women who helped build hip-hop empires alongside some of the most powerful men in music, only to later describe those same men as manipulators, abusers, or ghosts who disappeared when the spotlight moved on. These stories aren't just gossip. They are power dynamics playing out in public. And to understand how messy fame and intimacy can become, you have to start with one of the most infamous relationships in hip-hop history. The volatile, painful saga of Marshall Mathers, better known as Eminem, and Kimberly and Scott. High school sweethearts from Detroit who rose together and collapsed together, marrying in 1999, divorcing in 2001, and then, in a move that felt equal parts tragic romance and emotional roulette, marrying again in 2006 only to divorce that same year. 2 marriages, 2 implosions, and one of the most publicly brutal love stories the music industry has ever witnessed. Eminem didn't hide the chaos. He turned it into art, most notoriously in the song Kim, an 8-minute eruption of rage where he theatrically acted out murdering her. He even performed it live while she sat in the audience. In hip-hop mythology, that moment is often framed as artistic expression. But when Kim later described that night, the emotional fallout told a much darker story. And that's where the line between performance and real life starts to blur in ways the industry still struggles to confront.
I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. I cried. I had to make sure that my kids don't hear it.
What made you cry?
He is supposed to be the man that loves me and is supposed to protect me, from being hurt. And here he is, completely and totally disrespecting me in the worst way possible in front of millions of people. Sure enough, he decided to do that song and not only perform the song, but use blow-up dolls to reenact like me being choked and just disrespectful things to the blow-up doll, and then threw the doll into the crowd. Like, for him to do that in front of thousands upon thousands of people, knowing that I'm out there and just watching everybody else sing the words and laughing and jumping around and like approval of I couldn't take it.
When Kim Scott left that concert, the damage wasn't just emotional embarrassment. It was psychological shock playing out in real time. According to her own account, she was so overwhelmed by what had just happened on that stage that she could barely function behind the wheel while driving home. And that detail matters because moments like that reveal the hidden side of celebrity relationships. The part where performance bleeds into real life. In interviews years later, Kim described that night as one of the lowest points of her life, saying the humiliation and emotional collapse stayed with her long after the applause faded. And the spiral didn't stop there. During a 2016 appearance on Mojo in the Morning, she revealed something even darker about a 2015 crash, saying it wasn't simply an accident, but a deliberate attempt to end her life. She described drinking alcohol, taking pills, and driving directly toward a pole, intentionally choosing a place where no one else would get hurt. At a human level, that detail changes the entire tone of the story, because it shows what prolonged emotional isolation can do to someone living next to global fame. Psychologically, people assume that being connected to a superstar means constant attention and support. But Kim described the opposite. A deep loneliness tied to someone who was famous everywhere but emotionally distant at home. In a separate interview on Hot 97 with Miss Jones, she made even more serious allegations, claiming that Eminem had been physically violent with her during their relationship. She said there were moments when anger turned into insults and physical intimidation, describing a marriage where the emotional distance felt just as painful as the arguments themselves. She also pointed out a contradiction she found impossible to ignore. The same man who publicly defended freedom of speech in interviews was, at the same time, pursuing legal measures that kept her from speaking about their private life. Now, critics will argue that Eminem's music and public persona are built on exaggeration and theatrical storytelling, and there is truth in that argument. Hip-hop, like many art forms, often blurs the line between reality and performance. But data from decades of celebrity culture shows something important. When private pain becomes public entertainment, the emotional fallout can multiply in ways that no one fully anticipates. To his credit, Eminem did not simply disappear from Kim's life after everything that happened. Reports say he stepped in during her 2021 mental health crisis, offering housing, financial support, and continuing to stay involved in the lives of their daughters. That part of the story complicates the narrative. Because relationships like this are rarely simple stories of villains and victims, they're chaotic collisions between love, fame, trauma, and power. But the portrait Kim painted remains haunting. A woman standing in the shadow of one of the biggest artists on the planet, slowly losing herself while the entire world watched the drama unfold like entertainment. And that raises a difficult question the music industry rarely confronts. When personal pain becomes part of the brand, who actually pays the price in the end?
We had like really intense highs and really intense lows. You know, it was never normal.
Just when you think the story can't get darker, another voice breaks the silence. When Khalees finally spoke about her marriage to Nas after nearly a decade, it wasn't gossip. It felt like buried truth finally surfacing. And once that silence was broken, the entire narrative around their relationship began to change.
If I were to really tell the stories, I couldn't write. Like, it was that crazy. Like, it was dark. It was really dark. Like, you know, there was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of just mental and physical abuse. And it just got to the point where I think for me, you know, God is so good because being pregnant, I probably would have stayed longer had I not been pregnant.
By April 2009, the illusion had completely collapsed. Khalees filed for divorce while 7 months pregnant with their son, Knight, a decision that signaled just how unstable things had become behind closed doors. Filing for divorce during pregnancy is not something people do casually. Psychologically, it often indicates someone believes staying is more dangerous than leaving. In interviews years later, Khalees described feeling terrified about bringing a child into what she called a complete and total mess. And then came the moment that froze the room during the interview. When asked directly whether Nas had ever hit her, she didn't dodge the question, soften the language, or retreat behind public relations caution. She simply answered. The silence afterwards said everything. Now, critics often caution against drawing conclusions from one side of a story, and that caution matters. Allegations are not the same as legal findings. But what made Khalees's testimony resonate with so many listeners was the level of detail and emotional clarity she brought after years of silence. It wasn't delivered like a scandal. It was delivered like someone finally releasing a truth she had carried alone for a long time.
Did he hit me? Mm-hmm. Did I hit him back? Mm-hmm.
Khalees also did something rare in celebrity interviews. She refused to portray herself as a flawless victim. She openly admitted that arguments sometimes turned physical on both sides, but she insisted she was never the one who initiated the violence. Her description of the relationship painted a chaotic picture. Nas drinking heavily, becoming furious over minor interactions like someone greeting her at a party, and then waking up the next day with no memory of what had happened. From a psychological perspective, that pattern, rage followed by amnesia, is often associated with volatile relationships where alcohol amplifies existing tensions. But the real turning point, she said, wasn't the past. It was the present. After 9 years of silence, she chose to speak out because of a custody battle involving their son. According to her account, Nas had attended only 2 of Knight's birthdays in 8 years. Whether that statistic tells the whole story is still debated. But emotionally, the implication was devastating. Because for many parents, absence, not conflict, is what cuts the deepest.
And I say what I have to say to him all the time, like, you suck. Like, why are you doing this? This is whack. You're a fraud. You're fake. You're a coward.
Nas publicly denied the abuse allegations, calling Khalees's account exaggerated and insisting the relationship had been far more complicated than she described. And that's where these stories often become difficult to untangle. In high-profile divorces, truth is rarely delivered in neat, symmetrical narratives. But what is undeniable is the impact her story had when it finally surfaced. After years of silence, Khalees had clearly decided that whatever the consequences, she was done protecting a version of events that no longer felt authentic to her. And that pattern, women stepping forward years later with accounts that challenge public mythology, is something we're seeing more frequently across entertainment and politics alike. Because once silence breaks, it tends to ripple outward.
You want to take the high road, and sometimes it's hard. But when it comes to family, I mean, Kanye and I will always be family.
And then there is the story of Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, a relationship that didn't explode in violence but slowly cracked under the pressure of genius colliding with instability. Kim has never accused Kanye of physical abuse, and that distinction matters. Instead, what she described was something far more complicated: living beside a man whose brilliance and unpredictability were inseparable. When she filed for divorce in February 2021, she stayed largely silent about the details for years. But in a candid 2025 appearance on the podcast Call Her Daddy, she finally explained the deeper problem. It wasn't one dramatic incident. It was the daily uncertainty, waking up every morning not knowing which version of her husband she would encounter. In psychological terms, unpredictability can be as destabilizing as conflict because it erodes a person's sense of security over time. Kim described moments where private conversations became public headlines and financial decisions swung wildly, like Kanye purchasing 5 Lamborghinis during what she described as an episode and then giving them away shortly afterward. Critics argue that living with someone battling bipolar disorder requires patience and empathy, and Kim herself acknowledged that repeatedly, speaking about Kanye with compassion even while leaving the marriage. But her conclusion was simple. Once her own mental health started deteriorating, staying was no longer an act of loyalty. It was self-destruction.
When you get into Hollywood and you're a celebrity, anything that I do is under a microscope. So when you say something like that, it should be public record. It should be a police report. It should be evidence.
The same tension between loyalty and survival appears in the quieter but equally painful story of Master P and Sonia Miller. For decades, the public narrative focused on Percy Miller's rise from poverty to building the No Limit empire, a blueprint for independent success in hip-hop. But Sonia's version of that story adds a missing chapter. She says she was there from the beginning, helping open the first No Limit record store, becoming the label's first artist, and raising 7 children while the business expanded into a multimillion-dollar powerhouse. After 24 years of marriage, she filed for divorce in 2013, accusing Master P of infidelity and financial abandonment. Her claims shocked many fans because they clashed with the image of a disciplined entrepreneur who often spoke publicly about family values. Master P denied the allegations and argued that he had always supported his family financially. Critics pointed to the lack of official documentation backing some of Sonia's claims. But emotionally, the story resonated because it reflected a familiar fear, helping build something enormous only to feel erased from the history of it. The legal fight lasted nearly a decade before concluding in 2022. By then, Sonia had rebuilt her life independently, returning to school and pursuing new creative projects. Her pain wasn't explosive or theatrical. It was quiet, reflective, and perhaps more unsettling because of it.
Did you go to therapy with her?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Right.
So you actually addressed it,
Right.
tried to work through it, tried to do the work, and it just was like not happening.
You know,
Well, then you tried.
I can tell you that I'm saddened. I can tell you that I'm disappointed. But again, God has put me in a different path. And that path is going to entail for me to take care of myself and to love myself.
Fast forward to the collapse of another seemingly unlikely marriage. Rapper Jeezy and television personality Jeannie Mai. On paper, they looked like opposites whose differences balanced each other. He represented the hardened authenticity of Atlanta street rap. She embodied the bright optimism of daytime television. They married in 2021 and welcomed their daughter Monaco a year later. Less than 2 years after the wedding, Jeezy filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and cultural gaps between their upbringings. But once the legal process moved forward, Jeannie's 117-page filing introduced far more serious allegations, including claims of domestic violence and concerns about unsecured firearms around their child. Jeezy denied every accusation and called the allegations disturbing. From an analytical standpoint, Cases like this reveal how divorce litigation can become a battlefield where competing narratives emerge simultaneously. Jeannie later described feeling like the most broken version of herself during the marriage. Yet by 2026, both appear to have reached a fragile peace, focusing on co-parenting their daughter. And that pattern, conflict followed by reconstruction, is becoming increasingly common among celebrity divorces where both sides ultimately move forward separately.
Now I'm crashing out. Cause now I'm gonna crash out and I don't give a I want you to die, but I want you to die slow.
The moment everything finally exploded between Cardi B and Offset didn't happen quietly behind closed doors. It happened live in front of millions, like a relationship collapsing under stadium lights. What people saw wasn't just celebrity drama. It was raw frustration from someone who felt like she had been carrying the weight of an entire family while the public kept reducing her story to gossip headlines. Cardi didn't show up with vague statements or polished PR language. She showed up with numbers. Real numbers. She started breaking down the actual cost of raising their children, line by line, expense by expense, almost like a financial audit of motherhood in the middle of a divorce war. She talked about the $10,000 monthly driver who transports their kids safely, the elite private school tuition that runs around $45,000 a year for their daughter Culture, another $35,000 for their son Wave, plus nannies, tutors, security, and daily expenses that come with raising children inside a high-profile lifestyle. In that moment, something interesting happened psychologically. The audience stopped seeing a celebrity rant and started seeing a parent explaining the reality behind the glamour. Because according to data from modern celebrity divorces, the financial burden of maintaining a child's lifestyle after separation often becomes one of the biggest sources of conflict, especially when both parents are public figures with very different income levels and responsibilities. But what made Cardi's live stream different from the usual celebrity divorce drama was how unfiltered it was. There was no attempt to protect the brand or soften the language. She accused Offset of being largely absent in the day-to-day life of their youngest child, and described feeling like she had been left to manage the chaos on her own. The anger in her voice wasn't calculated. It sounded like someone who had spent years forgiving the same patterns only to realize those patterns were never actually changing. Critics quickly jumped in, arguing that airing private family issues online only makes situations worse and turns children into collateral damage of internet spectacle. And they're not entirely wrong. Studies on social media conflicts show that public arguments can escalate emotional damage rather than resolve it. But Cardi's supporters pushed back with a different perspective. They argued that what people were witnessing was not just a rant. It was someone finally refusing to protect a narrative that had been hurting her for years. To understand why that moment resonated so deeply online, you have to look at the history of the relationship itself. Cardi B and Offset's marriage has always lived in a strange space between romance and chaos. They secretly married in 2017 after a whirlwind relationship that quickly became one of hip-hop's most talked-about partnerships. Within months, rumors of infidelity started swirling, and eventually video evidence confirmed them. Cardi forgave him. Then their daughter Culture was born in 2018, and fans hoped the family dynamic would stabilize. But the cycle repeated itself. Cheating rumors, public apologies, dramatic gestures like Offset interrupting her performance with flowers begging forgiveness in front of thousands of people. She forgave him again. In 2020 she filed for divorce, then withdrew it weeks later. Their son Wave was born in 2021, and for a while it looked like the relationship had survived yet another storm. Psychologically, this pattern is something relationship experts call the reconciliation loop. Cycles of betrayal followed by emotional reunions that temporarily restore hope but rarely address the root problems. Over time, the emotional cost of that loop compounds. And by 2023, Cardi quietly admitted she had been single for a while. The final breaking point came in July 2024 when she filed for divorce again, this time while pregnant with their third child. That detail alone changed how many people viewed the situation. Filing for divorce during pregnancy often signals that someone has reached the point where staying feels more damaging than leaving. The financial battle that followed added another layer of tension. At the time, Cardi B's estimated net worth was around $80 million, significantly higher than Offset's estimated $28 million. When reports surfaced that Offset was seeking spousal support and a share of assets, the public reaction was explosive. Critics accused him of trying to profit from the marriage, while supporters argued that divorce law applies to both men and women equally. Legally speaking, that's true. Courts often consider income disparity regardless of gender. But emotionally, the optics were difficult for many fans to reconcile with the narrative they had seen for years.
He stood up my kids 3 times. He has seen Blossom only like 5 times.